Want to know what the movers and shakers of New Hampshire's performing arts are thinking? Welcome to New Hampshire Unscripted with your host, Ray Dudley.
Yes.
Good morning.
Hey, Andrew, how are you?
I'm well. I hope you don't mind, but I scripted this performance for New Hampshire Unscripted. So
Thanks.
everything's written out loud. It's great to see you, my friend. How are you?
Oh, I'm so good. I'm good. It's so good to see you, too. Long overdue.
Yes. This whole separation thing
Ugh.
giving me anxiety. I don't know why.
I am way over it, I'll tell you. Way. How are you doing? Looks like you're busy lately.
Yeah, I've been very, very busy between responsibilities for Hatbox, the Claremont Opera House, which I was hired to be executive director of back in the beginning of January, my work with the Economic Reopening Task Force subcommittees on performing arts, fairs, and festivals, and Monday night, what is today? Wednesday. Monday night, I rejoined the Board of Selectmen in the town of Bradford, and they appointed me chair. So I've got a lot on my plate, but it's good.
Yeah, I guess. Do you want to cover all of that, or do you just want to stick with like Hatbox? And I'm kind of curious about the Claremont thing as well.
I'm happy to talk about whatever you like. I've carved out a good chunk of time here, and so whatever you'd like to do is fine by me.
So let's just start on a friend basis here. So what's going on at Claremont, and how'd that come about?
Well, a couple of years ago, I had been brought in to consult on their lighting rig. They had a number of part-time staff who have done upgrades to the space, but nothing on a coordinated effort. And so they asked me to come in and look at the space, and I wrote them a proposal and said, "You pay me for the proposal about what my work is, and if you hire me to do the work, then I'll discount whatever you paid me for the proposal." So I spent a couple of days in Claremont looking at their lighting rig, the fixtures that they had, the control and things of that nature. And I helped them out a bit and wrote a proposal and got a chance to connect with several of the board members there about the work that I've been doing at Hatbox and the systems and ticketing and, all the stuff that comes from operating a performing arts venue. Back in the last summer, their executive director, who had previously been the office manager at the Claremont Opera House, decided it was time for her to leave after 20 years of having been there, in part to take care of her mother. We all some of us have aging parents, and we have to find ways to be able to support their needs. Some of us are aging parents. I'm rapidly getting to that point.
That's the truth.
Can't wait for my daughter to take care of me. So they actually, a couple of board members there asked me to apply. It wasn't really on my radar. I had no desire to become an executive director of the Opera House, but the pandemic was here. I was on unemployment because as a performer, I had no work, and I've never had a day job since the late 80s or early 90s. I was managing a typesetting company, but I was always a gig worker. I managed a typesetting company. I taught high school theater. I was the director of a community center. I did a lot of things, but to accumulate to a full-time position kind of a thing. And, that when they asked, I figured, well, what the heck, I'll apply. In part because I wanted to use it as an educational opportunity for myself to see what sort of systems they're using, to see how I might learn from what they're doing and apply those at Hatbox. I do a small amount of consulting for other theaters in terms of designing systems, both physical systems like lighting design, lighting rigs, things of that nature, but also to look at operations, and try to figure out what's an effective and efficient way to operate as an organization. And in fact, 5 or 6 theaters in New Hampshire switched over their ticketing systems from the ticketing systems they were using to the one that Hatbox was using, in part because I had been, advocating for them because we found them very effective and efficient in our operations at Hatbox. And when Vendini was started to go down in flames and people were having challenges with it, people asked for requests. Kind of ironically, I moved into a position where they just signed a 3-year contract with someone who is not the ticketing software that I use at Hatbox. So I'm having to learn how to use all of the stuff with the successor to Vendini. And that's been a bit of a learning curve. But so I applied. I ended up being one of 2 finalists. Went through a series of interviews, one of which had to be delayed when I contracted COVID right before Thanksgiving. Their board delayed my second interview, and then they offered me the position in mid-December. I started back in January. It's a part-time position now. I'm working 25 hours a week or so through the end of June, and then they're hoping to actually get me on full-time definitely by July 1st or earlier, based on funding. The not-for-profit world is a little different than the for-profit world, obviously, in lots of ways. But because lots of organizations are more dependent on donor funding to support all of their programming, unlike Hatbox, where every penny pretty much comes from ticket sales. So we have to program in a way that will encourage enough ticket sales to cover our overhead. We never have had any employees at Hatbox, and I've never been paid, as it's essentially been a labor of love for me for the 5 years. And you get to a point where you also have to make a living and put your kid through college and all that kind of stuff. So I took the gig, and we'll see. I'm going to continue performing, but on a reduced basis. And Hatbox is going through a process now, which was intended at the beginning to eventually transition over to a management group, whether that's a not-for-profit organization, whether that's an individual organization that wants to take it over, whether that's a group of affiliated organizations that want to manage it, but not under the umbrella of one organization. And I've been kind of the linchpin, keeping it all together and pulling all of the different producing organizations who use this space, making sure that they have accessibility and availability. And their support is in doing the shows, and occasionally we ask them to help in other ways.
Getting back to Claremont just for a minute, have you done nonprofit work? Are you used to like filing for grants and looking for sponsorships and that stuff before?
Well, sponsorships I've done that throughout with Hatbox. I mean, Hatbox, we look for sponsors through we haven't done it for individual shows, but we do it for our season. And for us, it's called advertising. It's not, it's the same process. Right. As far as not-for-profits for grants and things, I have been involved with 12 years working on the school board. We have filed for many grants over the years and received many grants. When I was the director of the Pittsfield Community Center, we had access and did apply and receive grant funding. But my job at Claremont is pretty well defined in that we are starting to expand our team that brings different skill sets to the table. We have a really active board president who has applied for and already received $40,000 worth of grants to help cover staffing costs. And that's just in the last 2 months. Wow. So, we are at the process, and I'm learning a lot as I do this. I had to, as part of keeping Hatbox alive, to be able to pay for everything when we're closed, I had to apply to the state for the live event relief fund. I had to apply to the state for other aspects. So I've had some experience in the last year in terms of having to develop the reports and proposals to successfully get funding. So, I come to it with a more entrepreneurial background. So I really want to, put my shoulder to the wheel and get performances in there that people are going to support. And, I like to think of programming as being a 3-tiered option. You have the programming that you do that everybody wants, or that has a broad base of public support, and it's going to make you money. You're going to have the material that you gamble on, that you're pretty sure you're going to at least break even and make a little bit of money on. Call that tier B, tier A being the top, tier B, and then you have the tier C shows, which are the experimental type of work, which you're doing in a constant effort to refresh your audiences, because let's face it, people who like, the Glenn Miller big band era stuff are rapidly going away. There are people who enjoy them, but you're not going to put 50% of your programming in that type of music genre. Now you're looking at, right now they've been doing a lot of tribute bands, a lot of 70s stuff, because the audiences that are willing to come out and pay money for tickets for that experience, they enjoy those types of experiences. So we're going to continue with a diverse set of programming, with concerts. We're hoping to reintroduce more theater. There hasn't been a lot of theater in the Opera House in quite a while, and a lot of their efforts have been in renting the space. So they rent the space to organizations, and then that is their season. Unlike Hatbox, where we don't rent the space, but we do a gate split. And so we're looking to do more with gate splits at the Claremont Opera House, and we may well produce a few shows as well. Just like Hatbox has produced Christmas Carol, and we've produced a couple of musicals. Some of the things that we have to do because others aren't doing them in the area, and we have to kind of prove that they can be done successfully.
Yeah.
That will inspire others to want to do them, and then we can kind of step aside and let them do that.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you have to kind of set the model. And I've been very grateful at Hatbox with lots of organizations like Square Peg and New World Theater and other companies who have come out and done work that Concord area audiences didn't know they would enjoy, and work that they haven't seen in this area. And then they produce it at a very high quality level and inspire each other to continue doing work in that area. So, I know it's a hard time right now. Some organizations are, and I was very sad to hear that Square Peg may not be continuing its productions, or maybe they're on a hiatus. I don't know. But, it's a hard time to produce theater when you don't know if you're going to have an audience and you can't cover your expenses.
Right. Is Claremont, I know nothing about them. Is Claremont similar to the Capitol Center for the Arts in what they produce?
Yes and no. Claremont is a presenting house in the same way that the Capitol Center for the Arts is. The challenge with Claremont is that it doesn't have easy accessibility from the ground. It's on the third story of a building, and while there is an elevator to get up to the theater, to the level, conventional bus and truck tours, so like a Broadway tour, is not likely going to want to go to the Opera House, because the amount of labor to get the scenic elements and the lighting truss work and whatnot up into the performance space, until we do something with the building that improves the accessibility for large tours, we can't do that. Capitol Center for the Arts, on the other hand, can and does. But, again, the Opera House has long been a place for both local production, not Capitol Center, Claremont Opera House has long been a place that we have had touring groups that have come and performed. A lot of music over the years. It's an opera house. So there's been lots of music over the years, but there's also been a lot of local theater and touring theater of a kind of reduced scale in the space. But as a venue, it's really an exceptional example of a grand opera house in New Hampshire. It was built in 1896. It was opened in 1897, and it is prior to the really ornate type of work, but just at the beginning of that. So you go into some opera houses and they're just full of everywhere is carved or gilt in gold leaf, and it's a beautiful facility in that you walk up these 2 flights of stairs that are all beautiful golden oak, and they've never been painted. It's just beautiful woodwork as you climb up. They have these glorious stained glass windows in the theater and in the entryway going up to the theater. And they have a balcony, and they have the original seating, but they have stencil work all along the ceilings and a wonderful carved cartouche at the top of a kind of an oval proscenium, and there is hand molded plasterwork up along the proscenium and in the cartouche, but that's the only place the molding is. The woodworking on the outside coming to it has lots of intricate carvings and things of that nature in it, but it's understated and yet really it's stunning in its simplicity, and it impresses where it needs to impress. And they were closed. The Opera House opened in 1897, and they closed in the mid 1940s as a result of competition with the movie houses that had moved to town. And it was closed basically from the mid 40s. It became a storage place for the city of Claremont to just dump gear in and surplus stuff, but it didn't sustain. It wasn't until the mid 70s that there was a substantial effort, and they put over $1 million in the property to bring it up to date then, and then even more money down the road. In the 90s they replaced their hemp house. They had a nice fly rail above. In fact, when they were built, they had stock scenery built in 1896 to be used for the operas and performances that were going to take place at the venue. And in fact, they have a historic backdrop that was just refurbished a couple of years ago that is hung and can be displayed. And we have some of the stock scenery is in storage still that's well over 100 years old. And it's really amazing to see what's there. But it has a raked stage, which means the stage has a slight downward pitch towards the audience. It has an orchestra that has a downward pitch towards the stage, and it has a raked balcony as well. And the balcony is a curved balcony, which is a really a beautiful example. But we, like any older property, there's work that has to get done. Yeah. But right now we got a grant. We have 2 grants from the Moose Plate funds, and we're replacing the 100-plus-year-old stained glass windows. We're taking them out, removing the leading, because in places, literally, the lead has melted to a point where the glass is sliding out, and there were holes in the windows. So we're slowly going to be replacing those over time, and then finding a way, because a theater, as you know, needs to be dark. And they had, in the mid-70s, they built these. One of our board members, John Bennett, who was around and actually spearheaded a lot of the 1970s rejuvenation of the Opera House, likes to call them lunettes, which is the proper term for them. I've been calling them plugs. There's big, things that they made in the 1970s because they couldn't afford drapes or whatever. They had to use their funds wisely. And so they built these plugs that go into the window. And then there was an artist who decorated the plugs to look like the stained glass behind them. Jeez. But in almost 50 years, because no light comes out the stained glass and no light comes in the stained glass because of the plugs, the lunettes, the community isn't even aware they're there. So we're looking at, they were just black windows. They couldn't see the stained glass. So once they've been refurbished, I'm looking to try to get funding so that we can light them up from within. And I'm looking to get funding to put in blinds. So trying to think of, in the old days when you used to go to the movie theaters, and this precedes me, I'm talking old days. I was a projectionist at the Scenic Theater.
I may remember it, so go ahead.
But you would have a curtain, and then the curtain would open, like the film would start on the curtain, and then the curtain would open and it would reveal the screen. I'd love to have that kind of thing with the stained glass. So when your audiences arrived, there are blinds on the stained glass. You can see light coming through the window. And then just before the show starts, all of those black out the room. And then you see then it goes to dark, and then the show happens. So it's really one of the most understated yet luxurious opera houses in the state of New Hampshire.
I don't know if you saw me shiver when you mentioned the elevator that goes to the 3rd floor, but I had a sudden flashback of the Phoenix Hall.
Oh gosh, yeah. The elevator is bigger at Claremont than the one at Phoenix Hall.
That thing gave me more fits. I never thought that thing would keep going up to the 3rd floor. Good grief.
Well, and you and I rehearsed Jesus Christ Superstar there for Sandcastle back in the day.
Yeah.
And I remember preferring to come up the stairs because you never know if the elevator was going to lock in place as it went up. So
we used to have to carry those stupid sets out the back door or whatever the heck that
gosh, yeah, down that flight of stairs around the wind until the bottom.
Yeah. Thank you for that. What's the capacity at Claremont?
Claremont Opera House currently seats, there are more than 765 seats, but there are 765 effective seats because there's about 20 that have impaired view. Like there are 3 pillars, 2 pillars that support the balcony and 1 pillar that actually supports the bell tower which is part of the roof directly over the Opera House proper. So we can seat 765 in normal times. A little more with folding seats in the front. We have to have a fire detail because at this point in time, there's only limited sprinkling. There's only limited sprinklers in the facility, in part because the facility is owned by the city and they have not yet put the funds into sprinkling, and in part because of the historic nature of the property. It's got a curved ceiling that channels from the proscenium back to the balcony. Jeez. And with all of the stencil work that was done on the ceiling, it's not going to be impossible, and it will have to be done at some point, but putting in a sprinkler that doesn't significantly affect the historic preservation side of the property is going to be a bit of a challenge, and it'll cost money, obviously, to do that.
Yeah. How does that impact? I know you're not currently probably doing magic shows yourself. How will this impact your ability to do that? It's going to take time, right? It takes time away from whatever you were doing.
Sure. Again, Hatbox has taken up a lot of my time over the years, over the last 5 years, and I have tried a few times to really get a crew of people to kind of take off some of the responsibilities for that. The Opera House has in some ways been kind of a blessing in that it's kind of alerted people to the fact that, well, he's not going to be here. So if you want the space to continue, you have to show up and make it all work. So there's that. And I think it's a good thing. In fact, we have a meeting tomorrow night with a group that's developing the bylaws and developing the operations of the organization. As far as my shows go, the board asked me when they were interviewing me how I would balance shows and whether I was going to continue doing shows. And my plan is to continue doing performances. I will reduce the variety of programming that I currently offer in order to be a full-time performer. I have Discovering Magic, which is my sleight of hand show. I will continue doing Discovering Magic. I have Jonathan Harrington, which is my 19th century magic act, which I do at Canterbury Shaker Village and have done at other historic properties. I will continue to do that. Alejandro's Old Time Magic Show, which I've been doing for 30 years at fairs and festivals and, libraries and parks and recreation. I will probably continue doing that for existing customers, but I'm not going to be out there hustling for work like I was in the past. And I'm still in a probationary period with the Opera House. They may decide that, after a year, they don't want me anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see. And so while I'm working to divest myself of Hatbox in some ways, it doesn't mean I'm not going to be involved. It doesn't mean I'm not going to support the effort there. And again, as a performer, I've been performing my whole life. And it is efficient and economical for me to continue performing my one-man shows because the pay is good, the flexibility in terms of hours is good, and if I want to perform, if I want to keep my chops up, so to speak,
sure.
I have never done a lot of community theater since I became a full-time performer. The last couple of years, I've done more community theater than I have done in 25 years before that. I was in the Farnsworth Invention, I was in Invasion from Mars, and I was in Background Check, an original play at Hatbox, and none of which I really sought out, but a couple of them they recruited me to, and I decided, sure, why not? I would like that experience again. But I had forgotten how much time it takes and the energy and effort in memorizing lines and all that. But we're planning, I have one more performance that I had begun before we were supposed to do it in the fall, a production of Greater Tuna that I performed with Eric Stanley, who here in Concord. And we did that show in 1991 at the Anacarico Music Theater. And we had talked about doing it again at some point in the future. And when we were struggling trying to find programming, I had thought it would be fun to do it at 30 years. But because we had a slot, we decided to try to do it last fall. And we didn't have enough audience members to make it financially worthwhile. So 2 weeks before we were supposed to open, we made the decision to close the theater to sustain all the producers' resources and the like, and push it down the road. So we're hoping to do it this fall, which literally will be 30 years since the last time we played these characters.
That's fortuitous.
So after that, I'll stick to the magic, but I won't be doing as much magic as I've done in the past.
Nice. I didn't know you did all those other ones. I just was aware of your Discovering Magic show.
Yeah, I have the Professor Awesome Wonder show. I have Andrew Pinard Lies Honestly, which was my show on deception and self-deception, which was a lot of fun. Again, to stay viable as a solo performing artist, you have to have a catalog of work, because people don't want to see the same show every year. They like variety. So you end up doing that. I had a seance show, An Evening with the Spirits, which I toured, which was a lot of fun. And I'd love to bring back someday, perhaps. But again, this is an interesting opportunity, and it's an evolution of the work that I did at Hatbox. One of the reasons I got the gig was because they saw how successful Hatbox was. They were doing at the Claremont Opera House between 24 and 30 shows a year. And when I say shows, I mean performances. At Hatbox, we were doing 20 shows plus 5 or 6 series that were anywhere from 175 to 200 performances in a year. So I think that they'd like to get more to that model and get more revenue in the space and get more love from the community and see it used and be a vital resource and asset to the community. And I want to do the same.
Yeah. Let's segue to the Hatbox, since we've brought it up a couple of times. What is the, before we get into the Hatbox itself, what's the current status of the mall?
Well, it's owned by the people who purchased the mall just before we moved in. Yeah. So the same company has owned it since 2016. In the time since we moved in 2016, there have been over 20 stores that have closed, maybe more than 25 at this point. I've lost track. The big anchor stores are gone. Bon-Ton, which had 2 locations, closed both locations. Sears closed its location. Old Navy had closed just before us, but there was a bounce house company in there that brought in a lot of activity. That's closed and gone and has been replaced by contact tracing for the state. The state actually rents that space. The state is renting Sears right now to do vaccinations in and to do COVID testing in. JCPenney is the only major department store that still exists there. Talbot's exists. There's lots of other stores that are there, but the owners are still the owners. And the management, I have gone through 3 different managers of the mall. Well, 4 now, maybe 5 if you count the people who took over in the interim when the managers left at the mall, people who manage that specific property. We currently have an interim manager who was the office manager who took over when the last manager, when they made a mutual choice to sever their relationship. So, but they have been, it has been a fruitful relationship in terms of what we've been able to do with our performance venue. We're hoping to continue and maintain it. And I'm actually have a meeting tomorrow with an organization that I'm trying to encourage to develop one of the empty storefronts as a multicultural community center and maybe open another performance arts venue. I have enough theater seats to open a second performance space. And before the pandemic, I was seriously looking at opening a smaller yet venue for the improv comedy, for the stand-up comedy, for the magic show, so we can free up and do even more theater programming and more extensive, more involved works in the main theater, and then have a smaller performance arts venue for even workshops and classes and
Would that be separate from the Radio Shack space that you had?
Yes. We had been looking at a couple of vacant spaces in the mall that were adjacent to the service corridor in the back of Hatbox, and investing in a door through the service corridor into one of those spaces so that we wouldn't have to. Right now, the Radio Shack space is used for rehearsals and scenic construction, but getting the scenery from there to the theater, you have to go outdoors, truck it all the way around the mall, and then bring it in at the theater. And it would be wonderful if we could migrate spaces within the mall, and that way any migration of scenery can go directly indoors from one space to another. And since we talked about doing that, there was another space in the mall, the shoe department, closed, and they also share that service corridor, and it's a much larger space, much closer to the restrooms and the mall exit. So I'm not in a position to do it right now, but I'm encouraging that the organization that takes over Hatbox look at these additional options. I had reached out to the community players of Concord, yes, I said it right. Sometimes I say Concord Community Players.
I do the same thing.
Same thing. To encourage them to look at renting space at the mall to free up conflicts at their studio space, because often they're rehearsing multiple shows at the same time, and yet one of the shows always gets priority in the major area where they put up the scenery and whatnot, and you can't rehearse. The proximity is so close, you can't realistically rehearse two shows on the same night because of sound issues and things of that nature. So again, they've got their own development work that they're doing there, so they haven't really chased that down yet. But at any rate, I think that the Steeplegate Mall is well due a renaissance. And part of the challenge has been the mall ownership not having the vision to migrate from one business model to another. And I think the pandemic, they were feeling it beforehand as the mall was slowly being vacated. But with the pandemic shutting so many places down, they have to pay their taxes somehow. Right. They have to pay the mortgage on the property somehow. And so they're going to have to reinvent themselves or sell the property and disperse it, which there are lots of people who want that. There are people who want to see it knocked down and turned into a 55 plus community or whatever. I think that somebody who was to redevelop the property might well redevelop portions of the property the way it is, but carve it up into living areas. So you have an indoor court, that people could walk in and utilize. You'd have access. There's a hair salon in there now. You'd have access to a hair salon you could walk to. You could have access to a theater that you could have access to a gym that's already there. So in some ways, the businesses who have chosen to site there, if the property owner realizes it, there's already a benefit because our businesses have made it more and more feasible for them to convert some of the storefronts into living areas.
Yeah, interesting, huh? How that evolves like that. Nature has a way of doing that.
It sure does.
So let's talk about Hatbox now. What I saw that you were looking for a board or doing something with the board, and so if you could explain the current format of, I guess, its ownership or how it's run or whatever, and then let's talk a little bit about what you want to happen or what is going to evolve. Speaking about that, with the future here with a board or whatever.
Well, there wasn't a lot of grand discussion about how we organized Hatbox to begin with. Hatbox has been something I had been working towards for 25 years, collecting props and equipment. And I had started facilitating a media makers group in Concord a couple of years before Hatbox opened. And I mentioned this idea of how great it would be for Concord to have a performing arts venue, and that I had these things and that things. And it kind of snowballed. There were people, Kevin Barrett was one of them, who attended as a writer to this media makers group, but who had done community theater in lots of areas and had written plays and whatnot. And he got very excited at the option. So when we launched, we didn't launch as a not-for-profit. Basically, I launched it as a sole member LLC. So I technically own it. I pay taxes on it. So any of the 40% that Hatbox takes from the ticket sales, I have to pay taxes on 100% of the revenue. So I'm paying the taxes for all of the organizations that use the space. And that can have an impact on our household income.
Yeah, I guess.
But it's operated very similarly to a not-for-profit in that we have no employees. We are all volunteers, myself included. I've only taken a draw, which is an accounting term for when you take money out of your business as the owner of a business. It's called a draw. I've only taken a draw once, and that's because some of the money that went to Hatbox was technically supposed to go to my performing arts career as a magician. But because of the way they made me apply as for the self-employed funding, this was last year, they made me also report Hatbox revenue. And I wasn't trying to get it for Hatbox. I was trying to get it for whatever. Yeah. So I did take a draw to be able to pay part of my daughter's college tuition because it was a rough year last year. But the way Hatbox has operated was based on the model that the Players Ring had evolved into, of having, they called it producers meeting. We called it pitch night, which was frankly the unofficial name for it down in the Players Ring as well, where groups pitched to be a part of the season. We would look at the programming that was pitched to us, and we would try to put together a season from that, of which the producing organizations would get 60% of the revenue and could focus solely on their shows, on their productions, and Hatbox would take 40% to cover the cost of the space, marketing, and ticketing. So we handled all the box office. We provided the staff. You didn't have to worry about that. You showed up, you did put all of your effort and energy into your shows, and we would handle all the rest. And pretty much every show got a check cut to them the day they closed their show. We were able to do the math and reconcile the books so that they walked away making money. And pretty much every show that ran at Hatbox over the 5 years we've been open, the first 6 seasons, pretty much every show has at least broken even, if not made money. And many of the production companies have a revenue share model in place where, and we encourage this, that after they make their expenses back and after they put a little bit aside to start the next show, that they then split it evenly per share to the people who do the work. It's not a livable wage, but it, helps to cover the cost of mileage, gas, and it allows people who are really using this as a creative outlet, who have careers doing other ways, to get a taste of what it's like to be paid as an actor, to be paid as a designer, to be, again, it's not much more money, than gas money, but it's a way of expressing appreciation for their contributions.
So what has changed that is wanting you to move to the board nonprofit status?
Well, the main reason for it, I told people when I started the venue that they had 3 years of my life, that I would handle all of the administrative and logistical operations of running a performing arts venue. That included having the fire inspections, paying the license for the city, the permits, interfacing with the mall, writing the checks for utilities, writing the check for the rent, negotiating rent for the space, working out, doing all of the ad sales for the season program and all the production work of the season program, developing consistent messaging for the marketing so that posters have a very specific branding at the bottom of it. So when somebody's walking down the street, they go, oh, another Hatbox show. What is it? Mm-hmm. And their eye is drawn not only to the poster for the production company, but it provides a kind of a relatively consistent set of standards and expectations for the public at large. Mm-hmm. And then the other aspect of it was marketing our season and marketing our venue and interfacing with all of the producers. Interfacing with them, meaning, making sure they have a clear set of expectations for when they arrive, what support they need from the venue, and what they need when they leave, and providing educational opportunities. We had a series called, gosh, I'm blanking on it. It's been so long since we've done it. Hatbox Performance Lab, which were regular educational opportunities, which were given for free to the production companies as a way to enhance their capabilities with the gear in the space at the Hatbox so that they can improve the quality of their work. Mm-hmm. So there's an enormous amount of tasks associated with running the venue that production companies aren't really aware of. Right. And it's, like I said, predominantly I've done most of that heavy lifting. Kevin Barrett has done a fair amount of heavy lifting in terms of handling the publicity and press release. And up until a couple of years ago, he was also once a week, he was running box office. I would run box office once a week. I was there at least weekly. Meredith Hansen, who serves as a stage manager for a number of productions, also runs box office at least once a week. So, part of the purpose of the value is to the producing organizations. Right. All of this work is really so that they can do their shows. And the goal was that within 3 years that these producing organizations would take a more active role in producing the venue, not just their one show a year or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that never fully materialized. And so the goal in migrating, we had a meeting we tried to invite every producer that's ever worked at Hatbox to a Zoom meeting to say, hey, Andrew's not going to have 60 hours a week to work for free anymore for us. And if we want the venue to stay open, what are our options? And so we discussed a series of options, one of having one company take it over and make it available to the other the other producers, either on a rental basis or on a gate split basis. We talked about a series of organizations running it as a loose coalition, a management partnership. We looked at the possibility of a not-for-profit because in some ways, Hatbox has been very, very successful, but our this is a weird and kind of a snobby thing to say. We have not received support from certain quarters of the city because they just see us as a group of people who are just putting on stupid little shows for ourselves. And they haven't shown up. They don't realize the high quality of work that has been done there. And so as a result, we are not taken as seriously as other not-for-profits who produce less than we do. And don't produce the type of work that we do. So in part, becoming a not-for-profit in our community, because that's what people expect. Doesn't have to be that way, and I've proven it, that you don't have to run a theater or a performing arts venue as a not-for-profit. God knows the dance studios in the state of New Hampshire, name me one not-for-profit dance studio. There isn't one in the state that I'm aware of. Well, there used to be. Petit Papillon used to be not-for-profit. But really, the only other for-profit arts organizations in the state are dance studios. And again, for-profit doesn't necessarily mean you're making a lot of money. It just means... it just means that you don't have the reporting requirements of the not-for-profits. It's interesting. Claremont Opera House has not been eligible for operating funding from the state of New Hampshire because they haven't had a full-time executive director. Effective July 1st, the Claremont Opera House will be eligible to apply for $10,000 a year in operating funding for their venue and other sources of funding. I'm not saying it's an easy row to hoe. Frankly, not-for-profits are challenging because you have to deal with boards with competing interests on the boards. You have reporting requirements. You have a way of doing business that is not always efficient, and it's not always effective. Lots of not-for-profits go out of business every year because a board of highly well-intentioned people can't come to agreement with how to run and do consistent messaging and operate at a consistent level.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't necessarily listen to their professional staff, and their support dries up and the business closes. And a not-for-profit is a business just like a for-profit is. Hatbox rides that weird line that it doesn't have any employees. It doesn't have any, I'm not drawing a salary as the business owner. It's operating as a not-for-profit, but it's paying taxes.
Jeez.
And it doesn't have access to grants. So in lots of ways, it's, I don't want to say that one is better than another,
Right.
but I know that Hatbox is really easy for me to make a decision. You know what? I want to buy a light board. Do I have money in the account? I do. Great. So let's go buy a light board. And so I am able to be a little more nimble. For-profits in general are more nimble in how they operate because of the reporting requirements and things of that nature. And I think that you get to a certain point, and it's a fascinating place that I'm in. And this is a little inside baseball. But, being appointed to a position as the executive director of a not-for-profit that runs a large historic performing arts venue, there's a certain entitlement that comes behind who we are. We're the Claremont Opera House. We've been here in 1897. We're the music hall in Portsmouth. We're the Palace Theatre. So I don't want to say, and this is not, I'm not saying that any individual is acting this way. I want to be very clear, but there is a sense of entitlement that pervades the organizations and thus leads to an approach that sometimes pushes smaller organizations out of the pool.
Yeah.
Take up all the oxygen in the room, so to speak, whether right or wrong.
Sure.
We don't want it to be that way, and I don't think they want to be perceived that way. But they're big organizations, and it takes a lot to keep them up and running.
Yeah.
So they do what is in the best interest of their board and their organization, which is to advocate and get as much funding and as much local support as they can for their organization. And they don't, up until this pandemic, most of the organizations didn't even consider any of the organizations around them much more than competition.
Jeez. Man.
But now we're all in the same river. We're not in the same boats,
Yeah.
but we're in the same river. And coming out of this, I'm very heartened with the relationships that I have developed with performance arts organizations that didn't take what we do at Hatbox seriously, and now look and go, wow, you can reopen and we can't. And I've worked very hard, and because the financial model allows Hatbox to open, whereas the financial model of a large 1,300 seat venue, you can't afford to open for 50 people.
Right.
But if I get 20 people at Hatbox, that's just about enough to cover our expenses.
Yeah.
If we can do that consistently with shows.
So what's
It's
been
not
the
enough
interest in your, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
No. So have you had, what's the interest in people wanting to help you out with the board or be on the board, or how many people were in the Zoom meeting that you had?
We have had a couple of the producer meetings that had up to 30 something people in them.
Really?
The folks who have stood up to say, yes, I want to be on what I'm calling the pre-board board. So the group that's putting together the bylaws and kind of the organizational structure, what it will look like going forward. We've got 5 or 6 people on that committee, not including myself. And that's a good size. You don't want a lot of people in the room when you're making the sausage.
Right.
It's boring work. It's frustrating. And again, different people come at it from different angles, from different levels of experience. And so it can be heated at times, and not everybody approaches the work with the understanding that we're all aiming for the same goal,
Mm-hmm.
which is ultimately to keep the venue open and to provide the most opportunity that we can for others. Interestingly enough, when we had the large group, there were several people who wanted to take it over themselves, that they didn't want, and they wanted me to tell them what I wanted from them so that I would just give it to them. And I had to keep saying, there's no, what I want is to continue the organization the way it's been run. I'm not saying that it can happen like that. At some point, I'm going to have to compromise and hand the keys over and say, you know what, it's yours now. Run it whatever way you want to run it.
Yeah.
But I would like to see the organization to reflect the needs and desires of the community that it has been serving, rather than the needs and desires of a couple of individuals.
So with these 30-something people that showed up or have shown interest, are they primarily from other groups, or are they just people who love theater or performing arts? Where'd they come from?
They were all what I call the stakeholders of Hatbox. I invited all of the former producers from Hatbox to participate in this process. Many didn't show up. Many didn't even reach out and acknowledge the email. But we had enough people who were either pitching for the coming season or had done shows in the last year or two who expressed enough concern about, well, we know we can't do anything right now, but as soon as we reopen, we really want to do shows. And right now, the most accessible place in the Concord area for theatrical productions and the most cost-effective place to do shows, it's not just about the cost, it's also about the capabilities of the space. You can do really cool stuff with lighting and scenery, and the atmosphere, the intimacy of the space, the fact that you're no further away than 4 seats from the last row of the audience, and the capability in terms of lighting and sound, and the acoustics. Part of the big thing that we've done with our musicals, and I think one of the reasons both Barnum and 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee did so well and were received so well by audiences, were, number one, we had a great production team, amazing performers, a great team, and in a great space. But also because the space is different than most of the other public performance spaces that are used in the state. And as a result, you experience a musical in a completely different way. And you get to listen to acoustics. You actually, neither Barnum nor Spelling Bee had mic'd singers. So you were hearing, for the first time, a lot of audiences are so used to hearing all the sound coming from 2 speakers on the wall and not hearing it from the location it's actually coming from. To hear that subtlety and the nuance that comes from the vocal inflections, both singing and spoken word, as well as the ability to see the micro expressions on an actor's face.
Yes.
When you're from afar, all you see is a white blob walking across the stage. When you're up close, and this is, I think that's one of the brilliances of the way the Winnipesaukee Playhouse, when they started in a very small space, 65 seats, a lot deeper. It was deep and narrow. You were about 13 seats, I want to say, at the back row. They kept that kind of intimacy in the Playhouse, so you can kind of still get that if you're in the first half of the auditorium. Yeah. The rear half, you're more like a conventional proscenium. But having that proximity, means a lot. And I think a lot of the people who stepped up to run it as a not-for-profit, they're doing it because they want to continue the mission. They want to continue the standards that we've set going forward.
Where are you in the process now?
We have 3 or 4 different model bylaws that are being looked at. One of our pre-board members, Gina Bowker, has also been on several other not-for-profit organizations and served on, I don't know if she was on the board at the Players Ring or she was deeply involved with the board at the Players Ring. And so she has written one set of bylaws, and we're using these to stimulate discussion on how best to organize it so that it continues to maintain kind of the approach that we've taken. Again, the team hasn't fully coalesced. We're still in kind of early stages, but my hope is that by January 1st, that an organization will have started, that they will have begun fundraising, that they will have begun recruiting, they will have gotten people on their board that reflect not just the producers, but also reflect the community, so that we can get some kind of movers and shakers in the city of Concord to make sure that they go out and they are our advocates, both in getting butts in seats and also getting funding and attention for the work that's there. Because if I had any regret from Hatbox, and I really don't, this has been, I cannot be more grateful for the experience that I have had developing Hatbox, working with people to install the seating and design and put the space together, and being able to see people throw their hearts and souls into this. I have learned so much and developed some amazing relationships with people. And as I've said before, nothing gives me more pride than being able to sit in the back of the room, more joy than sit in the back of the room and watch people do amazing work and watch people being moved by it. And I want that to continue. I want to be able to be a part of that more, meaning I want to be doing less of the counting the money or writing the policies and things of that nature. And I want to be able to roll my sleeves up more and get in there with the making the arts rather than producing the venue. And we need people to be our advocates. I can't be the only one. The production companies are busy doing their work. The production team, those of us working the venue, I get out there and hang up posters because I do a show at the space. Now, the show I do at the space, I don't take any money for. It actually stays in the account and is used to sustain all of the other production work. But by getting out in the community, when I go out to hang up posters, whether it's Christmas Carol or whether it's Barnum or whether it's Discovering Magic, I have an opportunity to visit with members of the public and answer questions and give them updates on what's happening, and to get great feedback from people going, oh yeah, we went and saw this show. If I'm running box office once a week and I'm in the back office, reconciling the bank books and I'm, I don't get as much opportunity to interface with the public at large. I really should have more time to spend making sure that Hatbox is a bigger part of the community. And in some ways, the pandemic has been terrible because it's shut us down. Yeah. But I was the first person in the performing arts. Well, I was one of a few people in the beginning, immediately when they started the Economic Reopening Task Force. I started seeing that industry associations were going to be the ones dictating how and when their industries open. And I recognized immediately we don't have a functioning industry association for the performing arts in the state of New Hampshire.
Really?
So we don't. There's a professional theater association, but all they do fundamentally is organize the auditions for the summer programming and things of that nature. They're not an advocacy organization. There are other arts advocacy organizations, but none specific to the performance arts venues. And so I reached out to Ginny Lupi at the State Council on the Arts, and I wrote up an email for her to send out and set up the first Zoom meeting in the state and brought together the loose coalition of performing arts groups, which continues to meet to this day and is continuing to be a loose coalition. We aren't a formalized organization yet, and that's okay. That may be the way it goes. But I have been involved in the reopening guidelines, in writing the reopening guidelines, in helping not just the performance arts venues, but the fairs and festivals and other groups to consider how we reopen. And that has, in a way that, we look at the New Hampshire Theatre Awards and we go, yay, we come together and this is a night where we get to celebrate each other's work. Yes, that's true, but we don't really have any time to talk to one another. Mm-hmm. We sit through the awards and then we have the meeting after, the dinner afterwards, and we get to kind of catch up with people. But the one time a year we actually talk to people, we don't really get to talk about what's important. Yet I have been, since April of last year, I've been having, at the very least, monthly meetings, and sometimes 3 or 4 times a week, meetings with my peers, my colleagues, whatever you want to call them, in other performing arts organizations. And we've developed some really strong relationships between different types of organizations that never had the time to do it before.
Wow.
And now we were pushed together because we had to make sure that we had funding, because none of us were going to come out the other side because nobody was advocating for us.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, you never think about that. I mean, that's
No, I was on a
took a
call with
pandemic
Senator
to bring that
Shaheen.
about. That's crazy.
Yeah, I was on a call with Senator Shaheen just last Friday with 18, I think, other performing arts venues in the state. Not just performing arts, they actually included this time, and I was grateful to see it. O'Neill's Cinemas, Spinelli Cinemas, the owners of those spaces, gathering spaces for public exhibitions, shall we call it,
Right.
in one place. And we got to talk to the senator. This is the second time that I've talked with the senator, and she's been remarkable. And her staff have been remarkable about keeping us in their thoughts and making sure that we have funding or guidance to enable us to compete with other industries that are better organized and better funded than we are. Like I said, it's been a truly remarkable experience. It's a lot of work. It's a pain in the butt. And it's very frustrating at work at times, because when we put forth our first reopening guidelines back last year, the governor is going to do what the governor does, and we don't get any indication of what the changes are to the guidelines until he has his press release. And, he has his press conference, says, we're doing this. And then a day later, the documents drop, and we look at them and go, well, this doesn't work. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. So we have to go back with guidelines with recommendations. And that happened, by July 3rd. I think they had a June release. I want to say June 16th. By July 3rd, they had already been revised, and no venue that I'm aware of in the state last summer reopened when the governor said we could reopen, which was like June 24th. We opened a month later at Hatbox on July 24th, based on the numbers that were there. But, realistically, just because somebody says you can be open doesn't mean you can be. I mean, the ultimate arbiter, so to speak, is the customer. If the customer doesn't show up, it doesn't matter if there's a pandemic or not.
Yeah.
You're not going to stay open. If they say location, location, location. If you open a frozen yogurt spot at the North Pole, you're probably not going to sell much business.
Yeah.
And the same is true if you're going to open a performing arts venue in the pandemic. It's difficult.
So, with your ear on the ground, as somebody who has the ear of many other people, what's the future here? What's it look like? When do you think? I'm hearing a lot of chatter of groups that are starting to want to do things. The Winnie, Jean's Playhouse, Powerhouse now, and with the Colonial up here. What are you hearing?
Well, we can be open.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, we can be open. The guidelines are still there. We had a mask mandate that all of the performing arts venues they enacted on their own outside of the governor. And when the governor actually finally announced a mask mandate for public, when you're in public, that helped to reinforce what we were doing, and it made it easier to enforce it if people came in. We never experienced at Hatbox any really pushback on people not wanting to wear masks. Everybody, without fault, everybody wore their masks, and they did it willingly because they wanted to be able to see this stuff happen. To your question, lots of people have asked me, when are we going to be allowed to reopen? Unfortunately, I have no answer for that, other than we can reopen now under the guidelines as they currently exist. We are encouraged by the vaccination process and seeing how many people are being vaccinated. Let's face it, a lot of the performance arts, especially theater, are driven, the average age of our audience members is somewhere between 55 and 62. Yeah. And we're coming close to that group being vaccinated and above. So a lot of our audiences have already received, in New Hampshire, have already received 2 vaccinations and may well feel comfortable to coming back as long as we continue social distancing and mask use in the venues. So a lot of us are making preliminary plans to reopen. Hatbox is looking to reopen in April, not for theater, but for improv comedy, stand-up comedy, and magic. Very highly controlled situations that are limited in the number of performers on stage. We're going to continue under the current status. Our hope, and again, that's all this is, our hope is that there will be enough people who have been vaccinated that we will see relaxation of the guidelines to a point when we've submitted to the task force our interim step to being 100% open with no restrictions. So we're operating on this restriction. We want to get to 50% of that restriction and then ultimately get to zero restriction at all. We don't know when that'll come out. But with the vaccines and knowing that they've already reopened restaurants, they've relaxed restaurant standards to allow karaoke and solo performers without masks with an audience gap of 8 feet, or small groups up to 3 for musical groups in restaurants with at least 10 feet of spacing. That has reduced substantially from 25 feet of spacing that currently resides in the performing arts guidelines. So if you want to have music in your show, you might as well do it in a restaurant because they have far reduced standards compared to performing arts venues. Don't ask me why. I've made this argument throughout that in a theater with 100 seats that has required mask use of the audience are wearing masks and they're facing the same direction. They're not facing one another. Right. They're facing the same direction. And having 5 performers on stage that are not masked, that have gone through other protective restrictions, that has a percentage of 9% of non-mask use, or whatever that amount is. Very, very low. But in a restaurant, you can have 100 people sitting in a smaller space with cubic footage, facing one another, talking loudly over their meal, with only 5 people wearing masks, and you have 95%. One would argue that that there's 195% chance greater that you're going to get COVID there than you are in a theater. But we're held to a higher standard, and in some ways, I get it. We're a harder animal to a harder beast to pin down because every performance arts venue is different, whereas a lot of restaurants are similar. Just because of the scale of their operations. And this is from somebody who worked in the restaurant industry. I performed at Newark Seafood Restaurant for 11 years, twice a week in Merrimack, and they used to seat 1,000 people on a Friday night in the span of 3 hours.
My God.
Restaurants don't do that anymore. I mean, Dover might still, I don't know. I haven't been to the Dover venue, but most restaurants are under 200 seats.
That's crazy.
And most are actually less than 150 seats. So, they've reduced the scale, the cubic volume of air in a space, and their operations have changed, and it's more about turnover than it is about kind of depth of experience. And then the bars, that's a whole nother thing. I mean, bars, you're standing hip to hip, side to side, shouting over the other conversations. Again, there's a reason why bars have been closed, and bars are reopening faster than theaters are. But some of that's the economic reality. When you're running a venue of 1,300 seats, you have to make $20,000 in a night to cover all of your overhead and expenses for running program in that space. So, it's the business model. This is going to change the business model. A lot of the larger organizations are going to take years and years to really recover full audiences, and they may never recover full audiences.
Right.
I think of stadium concerts. I can't think of anybody who's going to feel comfortable to go back and go to Foxborough, the stadium. I went and saw David Bowie there with 100,000 people.
Gillette? Was that Gillette you're talking about?
Yeah. Whatever it's called now. Yeah, Gillette Stadium down in Foxborough, Massachusetts. The days of huge stadium concerts, we will get back to them. But I think people have gotten used to the intimacy of this, of being in somebody's living room, of being up close to people, and being able to do it in their underwear and not leave their house and not have to pay parking and not have to pay, there's a lot of people. Restaurants are going to take a long time to recover because people aren't going to go back and eat out as frequently as they did because they realized how much money they've saved.
Sure.
Or they've developed a new passion for cooking.
Well, even film. I mean, you can sit at home now and the streaming, Hulu, Netflix, and Apple, all the streaming services, they're vying for the same dollars now as a movie theater. and you don't have any chance. The chance of catching anything is like minimal, zero.
Right. Yeah, you're going to get a computer virus. You're not going to get the
Right.
the coronavirus.
Right. All right, my friend. Well, we're heading on over time here. What was there anything you wanted else to cover, to chat about?
Yeah, I had no. It's
Okay.
just a joy to spend time talking with
Yeah,
you, Ray. So
I
I had
know,
nothing
I know.
really to cover. If I could sum it up, I would say that I am optimistic and I am very hopeful for the future of live performance arts. There's a deep-seated need to share communal experiences. And story has always been what brings us together. People want to be able to walk away from an experience and say, do you remember that time when we,
Yeah.
whatever? And so that's just humanity. That's ground into our DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm very hopeful that we will begin that process. People respond more fully and more openly when they're in a room that's reflecting that to them. We laugh bigger in a room full of people who are laughing with us. We cry more fully oftentimes when we're in a room full of people who are crying with us. So it's going to happen. It's going to start at the smaller venues and build its way back up. Please know that everybody is doing our best on our end. The best way for us to reopen sooner and in a more financially responsible way is to go out and get your vaccinations. I know that if you have a philosophical difference, but if you like the theater and you want to go back to the theater, wear your masks, get your vaccines, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to protect others and ourselves, and ultimately raise that level of confidence that you're not going to run the risk of serious health problems by going out to see that light comedy farce that you wanted to see, or that original play, or that indie band. Help us help you, and do the hard work of staying masked and staying separated and getting vaccinated.
Well said.
We love you. We miss you. You, Ray, and your audience.
We do miss our audience.
We want to get back as soon as we can.
Yeah, I'm with you there. We miss them a lot. Well, my friend, thank you. I appreciate your time. I really do.
Thanks, Ray. You take care.
And there you have it. Another great one in the tank. That one's going off to the memorial. Have a great day.